Good. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to see you all here today. And I'm really glad you could all join us in such a large number after the years of being restricted in physical presence at this yearly Ketelaarlezing. There are also people watching online. Good afternoon to them too. And today is the 19th Ketelaar lecture. We just before we started, we had a discussion on uh, the number of times that it has already taken place. The Ketelaarlezing has been organized since 2003. It was the first time. So today is the 19th. And it is organized in honor of Professor Erik Ketelaar, one of the most influential archivists of the Netherlands. Yes, I see you nodding, but it's true. Please accept this. So a special welcome to you and your family here. And my name is, for the ones who don't know that, my name is Avalon Doek. I'm the current National Archivist of the Netherlands. And well, Erik is a predecessor of mine, very, very far away still already. And today we have our special guest, and I'm really, really glad that he is here today to to exchange views with us on the role of the archive in society and archival questions in general. And he is so to say, a celebrity also in the field of archiving, I would say. And please welcome Mr. David Ferriero, the former archivist of the United States. And David has led. I'm sorry, I don't know. David has led the National Archives and Record Administration for 12 years, and he has retired in April this year, uh, but has been very busy since I heard today. And we are very delighted to have him here with us today. And I think that um, for many of us in this room, we have followed closely, of course, the developments of the ARA last year with the Mar-a-Lago situation and the missing documents in the last couple of years. And of course, that did a lot for the role of the archive in society and the awareness of the general public of the role of archives in society. So that's really a good thing. And that made archivists also look like heroes. So archivists to the rescue. I remember a tweet on that that has exactly that saying, archivists are the saviors of our democracy. But all in all, I think it, of course, the situation was critical. I think it was a good way of raising awareness for the role of the archive in society and what we archivists are doing every day. So I'm looking forward to this afternoon, and we are going to learn a bit more about your time under the Obama and Trump administration, and also I'm very interested in the open government initiative in the US, since we have a similar activities going on right now in the Netherlands. And I want to give the stage to Alexander van den Berg, who's going to interview David today. Alexander is an historian with a career in ICT and record keeping in the government of the Netherlands. So please, can I welcome you on stage?
What have you been doing since April?
Let's see, moving from Washington back to North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, where I was the librarian at Duke for many years.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks most recently in Italy, and catching up with lots of loose ends in terms of medical appointments and things like that, which were deferred for 12 years. And trying to figure out, this is the first time I have been unemployed since 1963, trying to figure out, what do you do with all this unstructured time? You know, has not been an easy transition.
It must have been odd for you.
Yes, very odd.
I hope you enjoy your retirement, and I hope you have many years left to enjoy that.
Thank you.
So you have been the U.S. Archivist for 12 years. What does the U.S. Archivist exactly do?
That's a great question. The archivist is responsible, the National Archives is responsible for the records of the United States, all those records that are created by the 3 branches of the United States, with different sets of laws that govern them and their access. It is compared to where I am today sitting in this facility, we are an infant agency, in infant archives. We started in 1935, which is a long time after you guys got into this business. But it wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt administration that we got serious about our archives. And the mission was kind of spelled out from the very beginning. And I want to quote a couple of famous people in terms of what their expectations were, what their aspirations were for the records of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
First is a letter from Thomas Jefferson in 1789, where he makes a statement that whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. That whenever things go so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied on to set them to rights. So this is 1789, and Thomas Jefferson was already making the point that the records need to be available. And then in 1791, 2 years later, he makes the comment that time and accident are committing daily havoc on originals deposited in our public offices. The late war has done the work of centuries in this business. The loss cannot be recovered, but let us save what remains, not by vaults and locks which fence them from the public eye and use, in consigning them to the waste of time, but by such multiplication of copies as shall place them beyond the reach of accident. Multiplication of copies. That's my defense for digitization of records.
Good to hear.
Thomas Jefferson is the father of digitization.
Take a note of that.
And then FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, in dedicating his presidential library in 1941, likened the dedication of the library to an act of faith. He said to bring together the records of the past and to house them in buildings where they will be preserved for the use of men and women in the future. A nation must believe in 3 things. It must believe in the past, it must believe in the future, it must above all believe in the capacity of its own people so to learn from the past that they can gain in judgment in creating their own future. So collecting and protecting and making those records available is from the very beginning has been what the National Archives is all about. And I'm sure you have questions about how easy that is or how difficult that is.
Well, you mentioned the word trust.
Yes.
And I believe there's not that much trust in U.S. government.
Yeah, it's a problem.
So let's hope your successor can aid in ameliorating that. So let's talk about politics to get it out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
You were named U.S. Archivist by the then newly elected President Obama. You remained in office when Trump was installed and left office 1 year after President Biden was inaugurated. How does this transition of presidential power work? What's the role of the archivist in this transfer of power?
So under the legislation known as the Presidential Records Act, which was created in response to Richard Nixon's claim that he owned records of his presidency, the legislation spells out the role of the National Archives in providing guidance to the White House on the creation and maintenance and final disposition to the National Archives of those records. So every transition from one administration to the next, even if it's the same president going into a second term, we start in the middle of the first term because we never know whether it's going to be a one-term or two-term presidency, working with legal staff in the White House about a potential transition of records. And then when the transition when and if the transition comes, then we're in a better position to actually transfer records. Records stay in the custody of the White House during the administration. They don't get transferred to the National Archives until the end of the administration. In fact, on Inauguration Day, January 21st, my staff is in the White House grabbing stuff, paper that's, now it's done all electronic, most of it is electronic, so that makes it somewhat easier. But it's not until that point that we actually transition the records. So up until recently, I have always said that we prefer a two-term presidency because it gives us more time to get prepared and do this in a logical way. During this transition, that you want to talk about, first of all, I should tell you that records management in the White House is controlled by the White House Office of Records Management, the WORM, as it's known, the WORM.
Okay.
It reports, the WORM director reports directly to the president's secretary. Does not, we have no role, the National Archives doesn't have a role supervising the WORM, but we have a very close working relationship, and since I've been there for so long, I had a very good working relationship with the director. And at the end of December, after the election where Mr. Trump was elected, at the end of that, towards the end of December, I called the WORM director to wish him a Merry Christmas, and in the conversation, he told me that there were 24 boxes of records being stored in the residence of the White House, not in the Oval Office where they belong, but in the residence. And that he had been assured by the president's secretary that they would be transferred at the appropriate time. So January 21st comes along, the paper records are picked up by my staff and delivered to the National Archives for beginning of the processing. And the 24 boxes were not part of what was delivered. That started a series of negotiations between my legal staff and the White House legal staff about where are the boxes. And I should mention, I was in my office during the inauguration watching it on television, and the screen was split between what was going on Capitol Hill and what was going on in the West Lawn with the Marine helicopter, because the president was taking, the former president was taking off, and I was watching as Mr. and Mrs. Trump walked out towards the helicopter, and behind them a staffer was carrying a records box. And I was going nuts, what the hell is in that box?
Only one box, no 24.
Only one box, yeah. So after some time of back and forth about where are the records, there are boxes missing, and what boxes? What are you talking about? All of this drama. They delivered 15 boxes. And in the 15 boxes, we discovered classified content. And at that point, became bigger than me. And at that point, I turned it over to the Department of Justice. And when you turn something over to the Department of Justice, you never know, what they're going to do, whether they're going to treat this seriously, or they're going to investigate, or what's going to happen. So I was as shocked as I think most people were to hear about the raid at Mar-a-Lago.
Mm-hmm.
So they had taken it seriously, which I'm very pleased. And it's not over. I mean, they recovered a lot of stuff, but I'm not convinced that we've got everything that belongs. So while it's easy to say that this is a wonderful message about the importance of archives, easy for you to say, but I am pleased that new light has been shining on the role of archives and the role of archives in our democracy, and the importance of the rule of law, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens next. I should say, anecdotally, I really felt badly for the entire 4 years was a kind of just about every week there was some indication based on the press coverage and civil society coverage of violations of the Presidential Records Act, with the president tearing up records, with the president flushing records down the toilet, all kinds of horrible things that on a weekly basis we were working with White House counsel about, these are the rules, this is what you need to do. The Presidential Records Act is clear that I have the opportunity to provide guidance to the White House, but I don't have the authority that I do under the Federal Records Act, which covers everything in the 276 executive branch agencies about telling them what to do. So
you have no real power to intervene.
Right. So we use the Department of Justice to do that work.
Okay.
Oh, so I was going to say, so you probably don't, this is probably too much in the weeds for you, but there was a period in the president's speech making for several weeks where he was ranting about the toilets in the White House and how they weren't flushing. And what is America? What's wrong with American toilets? And we were all like, what triggered that? And now I know what was triggering that. So when, towards the end of my time, I was feeling for those 18 folks in the Worm and invited them to come to the National Archives for a tour. And while they were there, I presented the director of the Worm with a plunger with his name inscribed.
A great sense of humor.
You have to have a sense of humor to be archivist of the United States.
But apart from toilet flushing and personalities, is there a difference between the three administrations you served in terms of openness, willingness to...
Sure.
Do you see a difference with the Biden administration you served very briefly at the end?
Biden is much more Obama-like than Trump was, certainly. The reason I agreed to become the archivist was the promises of the Open Government Initiative and the conviction of the Obama administration that the National Archives had a role to play in implementing his Open Government Initiative. I was the director of the New York Public Library, 91 libraries in 3 boroughs of New York. It's a pretty cushy job. So why would I give that up to come to Washington and work for the government? But it was the promise of open government that lured me to Washington. And I'm really pleased that it worked out.
No regrets?
None at all. None at all. No.
Are there any questions on the topic of presidential succession, politics,
Oh, and the succession also means, this is an important part of the role of the archives, there are 4,000 political appointees in the US government. Every transition means 4,000 people are leaving the administration, which means they need to be trained, educated, and brought up to speed about what their requirements are about leaving their records behind before they leave, and 4,000 people coming into the administration who need to be trained about what their responsibilities are. And that's a process that's jointly offered, monitored by records management in the agencies and my records management staff also to provide that guidance, that training.
Really
So that's another huge part of.
great responsibility as well.
Yeah, right.
Are there any questions from the audience, either at home or in this room? Don't be shy. Over there, man with glasses.
Bert de Vries, I'm the director of the City Archives of Amsterdam. I'm wondering about this periodically transferring the records every 4 years. How does the institutional memory of the government works then? You transfer all
Those
the
are
records.
those are presidential records. Those are only records created in the White House. Those aren't the records of the agencies. The records of the agencies are controlled by record schedules, which spell out how long they need to be retained in the agency and identifies the 2 to 5% of those records that are permanent value. And that's what gets transferred to the National Archives. And it varies by agency. Some of it is 20 years, some of it is 50 years. But that's separate from the presidential records.
And you have a clear definition of presidential records.
So there are two laws, Federal Records Act and Presidential Records Act. And the Federal Records Act covers the 276 agencies in the executive branch.
Any other questions? Maybe at home. One over here on the front row.
Marijn Engwaard, I'm the former National Archivist of the Netherlands.
Yes.
And of course, I read the newspapers, quite interested about what happened under the Trump administration. I was wondering, now you're telling this, is this the first time it has happened like this? Or were there precedents with other presidents?
Well, not if you read Mr. Trump's latest statements about urging the Justice Department to raid former presidents' homes, because everyone does this. As far as we know, this hasn't happened before. And that was, it was Richard Nixon that caused the creation of this law, and every president before that, starting with Herbert Hoover, as a gentleman's agreement, gave their records. It was up until that point their personal property. They gave those records to the government. So
I see a question on the second row.
Yeah, before the records are transitioned to the archive in those 4 years, are they actually applicable to Freedom of Information Act?
no.
Okay, that's clear.
It's great if questions are short and concise, as well as their answers.
And those are, I'm talking about presidential records, not agency records.
Okay, let's move on to.
Wait a minute.
Oh, one question over here.
Teacher Ketelaar, do you now, in hindsight, think your successor should have the power to tell the current president or a next one what to do with his records? If you only have an advisory role, should that role be more enforced?
Yes, I think the Presidential Records Act needs to be revised, but larger than that, I really believe that the records management population within the federal government needs to be centralized under the jurisdiction of the National Archives. That the records managers in the agencies report to in most cases, report to political appointees. So they have they're in the same tension that the worm is in many cases, and it has played out in various ways especially during the Trump administration. The model that I always looked at was the inspector general function within the federal government. Every agency has an inspector general and staff which is charged with investigating waste, fraud, and abuse within the agency. And they are an independent unit reporting to a central authority rather than reporting directly to the agency head. And I think that's what we need for records management also.
One question from our digital audience, or?
First.
Okay.
Klaartje Pompen, Noord-Hollands Archief in Haarlem. Thank you. I'm intrigued by these presidential records, and you for boxes. Did you get the digital equivalent? Because they have been digitally created, I suppose. Did you get these as well?
As far as we know, we got all of the electronic records. The problem was with the paper records.
Okay.
There's a question from the viewers at home. The question is, how do you draw the line between presidential records and personal records that were created by a president?
So there is a category of exemptions in the Presidential Records Act for personal records, and those are family and medical records. That's what's considered personal records. Everything else that's created in the administration is considered government property.
But what if you promote your own family to certain positions of power? There's no clear line between
That's
those
a good
two.
one. That's a good one.
But let's move on. Let's get to, we have to move on to transparency. Can you tell us more about the Open Government Initiative, an effort of the Obama administration to create an unprecedented level of openness in government, end quote. Does it really work that way?
Well, it's certainly, there was certainly an effort during the Obama administration to fulfill that dream. It has been on pause. It has been, during the Trump administration, there was absolutely no action on the open government front. And it was, and it's been picked up, recently been picked up in the Biden administration. So transparency, collaboration, and participation, the three pillars of the open government plan were, as I said, what attracted me to the National Archives. During his first day in office, President Obama had a meeting with the senior administration where he made the point that the US government doesn't have all the answers and we need to figure out ways to engage the American public in solving the nation's problems. And I took that to heart and worked with my staff to think about what does that mean for us? What can we do to ensure that we're being transparent in collaboration and offering opportunities for participation? And that was the genesis of the Citizen Archivists program, where we engaged the American public in helping us make access easier to our records. So in the United States, I sat on 16 billion pages of records, 47 million photographs, miles and miles of film and video, and about 6 billion electronic records so far. And not all of those records were described adequately. So photographs, for instance, basic information about them. So we experimented with loading a couple of thousand photographs and engaging the public, asking the public to tag whether they recognize people or places. What do you see here to help us describe this in a better way? That was the second activity that we created. The first one was transcribing records that were in handwriting, in cursive. A large percentage of records in the United States are in cursive. cursive isn't being taught in schools anymore. We have a generation now of kids who can't read our records. So we have loaded thousands of records, and we have people all over the country, actually all over the world, transcribing records for us, so that people can now read our records. So we've just passed. I checked this morning. We just passed the 220 million mark of tags that have been contributed to our catalog. People love to do this. People love to help us to participate in this, and it's just been wildly successful. And I was surprised. You know, I didn't expect it to be. We have a nursing home in Lynn, Massachusetts that has adopted the Citizen Archivists program, and they're tagging like crazy. It's been a great senior citizen activity, and the quality is super, and I'm really pleased. So we've done things like that, and then we've done worked creatively with Old Weather. I don't know if you're familiar with Old Weather, but they are very interested in climate change, and they have working with NOAA in the U.S. government, working on a digitization project with U.S. Naval and Coast Guard vessels, starting with the Pacific Northwest from the 1800s. The logs of those vessels have great data, weather data. So we've had people transcribing all of those, digitizing all of those logs, and then Old Weather maps the weather information and can demonstrate climate change over a century now, based on this digitization. So another way of engaging the public in what we do.
Now, how do you get all these people involved, all these volunteers?
A lot of it has been word of mouth. You know, we started off, and I was talking to folks here about the work that you've been doing, and it was very similar. We didn't know what to expect. You know, we had, I think it's safe to say we had low expectations of people being interested in doing this work, and we're totally amazed when the first tranche of a couple of thousand records was done in a week. And we expected this 6 months. We gave it 6 months to try, and it's just been word of mouth, and we've done a lot of publicizing of celebrating especially the people who have done lots of transcriptions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, I think it's safe to say, we have a lot of copycats, including the Library of Congress, who started a transcription project. Surprise, surprise. And the Smithsonian started a transcription project.
So spread the word. Okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone know about Dutch programs like-minded? Aflon, do you? Can you spread the word, Aflon, to all those people watching online?
I'm not sure whether anybody in the audience is not familiar with the projects that we do, but we currently finished the project on Engelandvaarders. So people who were in the Second World War on boats to England, or they were called that way, and also the Arbeidseinsatz. So that people who were forced by the Germans to work in Germany, cards of data on people that were transcribed also by the public, and that's really, really popular. And well, if you didn't know it, spread the word. It's very nice to do it on a Saturday evening when nothing is on TV. Please join.
Let's hope everyone skips Netflix and joins our volunteer program. Have you heard of the new Dutch law, the WOO, the WO? It's recently been passed through Parliament.
I heard about it from you in our telephone conversation, and you promised to find me an English language copy of it.
Which I don't.
Oh, okay.
Is there anyone from the Ministry of Internal Affairs around? I see someone in the back waving. There are no policy making. They're too shy. We have a wonderful new law today about open government, and if it works as it should be, people no longer need to request all the data, but it's already accessible. Just according to the school of thought of the global open government data philosophy. Are you familiar with the Open Government Partnership?
Of course. I was at the launch of the Open Government, International Open Government Partnership in Washington, and tried unsuccessfully. My former, my archival colleagues might understand this. I was unable to convince the ICA folks to get involved. that I think there's a very important role for archives to be playing in the partnership. As President Obama said, you can't have open government without good records management. A direct quote from President Obama, which he stole from something I wrote. But I really think that archives have, have something to contribute to the partnership. We have the records, and if we're serious about open government, access to those records is really important.
There are about 70 countries that are part of the Open Government Partnership, so a lot of them.
Including the Netherlands.
Including the Netherlands, right. Quickly joined in 2011. Belgium is not, unfortunately. If there are Belgian people around, pass it to your government. Many European countries are. Belgium is not, unfortunately. Is it really a good forum to discuss laws or about archival methods, or is it just more of a discussion platform?
It's for me, it's an opportunity to educate those people who aren't archivists who are sitting around the table talking about the use of data that the National Archives then has a role to play in these discussions. That was my point.
So you're really learning all these other countries what to do and what not to do.
Right.
Such as flushing toilets. Are there any questions from the audience regarding transparency or open government projects? On the first row.
My name is Martin Berends, former National Archivist. But now...
Who visited me in New York.
And we discussed the Open Government Initiative by then.
We did. And what did you do about it?
Let me tell you that story, David. When I was at the National Archives, the good news was there were a few members of Dutch Parliament who were willing to create a new open government law. And that took us 10 years. And from National Archives, we supported that. And I was glad that when I was in National Archives, that we were, I think, in the first stage of political discussion on that new open government law. And it took us 10 years in Parliament to create that new law, and you refer to it. And the two of us, my colleague Serv and myself, I just newly appointed in a by law created commission, the Open Government Commission. In our countries, they have an information commissioner. That, I think, was a step too far to create a commissioner. So we did the Dutch model, we created a commission. So that's why we're here. And that commission is trying to oversee all activities that are run by that new open government law. So that's what I wanted to tell you. That's what I want to tell the people here, because I think and we think that new open government law could help a lot to support our open government initiative. Now my question.
And I look forward to reading that law someday.
And we provide, David, we provide also that English copy.
Oh, great.
Great.
And let's discuss it. My question is, and that's also referred to all that citizen initiatives you talked about. do you see any correlation between the political orientation of the American public on the one hand and their willingness to support open government and to co-create and to work on that on the other hand? Is it a nation-spread interest, or is it connected to, let's say, specific political orientations? What's your feeling?
That's a good question. I don't have any hard data to support it, but my gut feeling is it's selective. It's very selective. It's folks who care about our history. Not everyone cares about our history. And I know that we've had internal discussions about fake news and fake information and ensuring that that doesn't sneak into this activity. But we haven't seen any indication of that thus far. Yeah.
Just to learn a lot more about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question.
Any other questions over there?
Is it on? Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Lauren Romein. I work at the National Archives. What we see in our work is that a lot of people feel sometimes conflicted between one law and the other law. So, for example, privacy law says you should destroy this, and then archive law says that you have to keep it. And have you seen this contrast in your own work, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, the most recent example has to do with the ongoing discussion about the U.S. Census. Every 10 years, the United States does a census, and the National Archives is responsible for releasing it after 75 years. It's a 75-year cutoff for privacy. And son of a gun people are living beyond 75 now. So these discussions about raising the limit to protect privacy of 80-year-olds, for instance, is an ongoing conversation that hasn't been resolved yet. And it's one of those interagency conversations with the Department of Commerce, who runs the Census Bureau, and the National Archives. So that's the most recent conflict, I would say, that we've experienced. And we've had, as you might expect, during the Trump administration and the immigration situation, ICE records, I forget what ICE stands for, but immigration stops at the border, records of those have controversy over what's kept and what's not kept, went for public review, and we had like 26,000 responses, which is unheard of in public review of record schedules. That caused us to revise the retention period because of privacy issues.
Any follow-up questions? Yes?
We've got another question from the home audience, from the viewers at home. Question is, how are the presidential libraries related to the National Archives? Sorry, that dropped off. How are the presidential libraries related to the National Archives?
So, President Franklin Roosevelt was the first president to have a presidential library. He opened, as I read, he opened his in 1941. Herbert Hoover, who preceded him, liked the idea, so he decided to have a presidential library. So in chronological order, everything from Herbert Hoover forward is part of the National Archives. And there was no National Archives before that, before Hoover. So the records of the earlier presidents are scattered all over the country. A lot of the material is in the Library of Congress, And there are non-government presidential libraries around the country, a handful of them that aren't part of the National Archives. I'm looking at you, but that's for the audience. I mean, that's for...
No more questions, then we'll move on. You've been director of the National Archive and Records Administration for over 12 years. What should a modern archival organization look like to cope with all the contemporary challenges?
Oh, technology. That's what it's all about. And, you know, I've been in this business long enough to know that listening to and being driven by user expectations is the way to go. When I was the librarian at Duke University, I can remember a faculty member storming into my office and crabbing about the fact that his students were only using online sources. No one was using books anymore. And what are you going to do about that?
So what you did?
I said, wait a minute, who's in charge of that class? You or me? So kids, I learned at Duke, expect to find it online. And forever, I can remember my librarians and I fighting that. You know, we need to do bibliographic instruction. We need to teach these kids, you know, the role of books. And I've completely switched around and think we need to be focusing on, so let's make it happen. You know, if people are changing their thesis topics because they can't find online information, then we need to do some, get the information online to support what they're doing. And that was the centerpiece of the strategic plan that we did for the National Archives, where I put a stake in the ground about digitizing everything in the collection, which scared the staff because the thought of trying to digitize everything in the collection was just overwhelming. But I would say that for anyone thinking about a career in the archives, a curiosity and passion for applications of technology and delivering information in new ways, a person who is comfortable and thrives on conversations with the user community about new and emerging technologies and how they do their business and what we can do to support their needs. Those are qualities that I look for. This is the greatest time to be in archives in terms of the role that archives can play in democracies and the exciting new ways of delivering content, and you never know when you've digitized stuff and made it available how it's going to be used. And I can remember I got into a lot of trouble at the New York Public Library where we had a huge digital gallery, it was called. And New York Public Library has a fantastic collection of menus from New York restaurants. They're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous with great artwork and great menus. And I authorized the digitization of 25,000 menus and got into a lot of trouble with my supervisor. I was the director, but there was a president over me about frivolous digitization projects. And 6 months later, a researcher from the University of Washington was doing a study of fish populations and was using the menus from the New York Public Library to see what kind of fish were being served over a period of time, which says, so I was there, see? So digitize it and see what happens. That's what's so exciting.
Did he come back to hold an exhibition on his research? Because you really left a mark on the archive with all your openness to host exhibitions, to host researchers.
I really feel strongly and still feel strongly that we have a responsibility to celebrate people who make use of our records and create new scholarship based on their use of the records. And I'm always, when I get a new book, I'm always reading the acknowledgements first to see whether we were acknowledged or not. And I'm really disappointed when a book could have been written better if they had used records from the National Archives. But then inviting those people to come and give presentations at the National Archives is a big part of the public programming at the National Archives. And I always, as much as I could, I did the introductions just to reinforce the fact that use of the government records was really very important.
Do you have any tips for that, to promote those public programs for people who don't look in books every day or aren't historians? Those people exist.
Talk to the front lines, the folks who are dealing with the public, and talk to them about or better still, what I used to do is wander around the reading room yourself and talk to users and see what they're working on. I found this at MIT. I learned this at MIT, that faculty don't have a lot of people to talk to, and their fellow faculty members aren't interested in how they do their research. So we did an information-seeking behavior study for 3 different disciplines at MIT, and what we did was to ask them, where do you get your information? And when you ask a faculty member, anything about what they're doing, it's like, sit down for a couple of hours, because they have a captive audience and they love talking about what they're doing. So that was a lesson I learned at MIT, and I always did that wherever I was. Even when I was the director of the New York Public Library, I would wander the main reading room and stop and talk to people about what they were doing and get a better sense of maybe how we could do it better, what kind of services we could provide that would make their life easier.
Is that something we're doing here as well, Aflon? We have that on camera now, so we're going to do that too.
Well, I used to be. I grew up as a reference librarian, and I still love doing reference.
Okay, we're moving towards the conclusion of our interview. As my final question, I want to ask you, what's the biggest challenge laying ahead of us in the digital age we're in right now?
It's I go back to technology. It is the biggest. It's the biggest issue, and it's the funding of technology that I think is our biggest challenge. That those administrators who are responsible for our budgets don't seem to understand that technology isn't a one-time event. It is an ongoing expense and needs to be refreshed on a regular basis. And you can't expect us to be doing our jobs if we don't have that level of support. And that's why when I said earlier today to you, your new best friend needs to be the CIO. That's the message you need to deliver, that this is an ongoing responsibility. Technology needs to be refreshed. People need to have the tools, the staff need to have the tools they need to do the work. And technology is changing more rapidly. And that's what I think that's our biggest challenge.
Maybe next year there will be plenty of CIOs in between all the archivists. Then we know we've accomplished that.
One of the things I learned early on in the Obama administration was I started at about the same time that the very first CIO of the U.S. government started, and we became friends and decided to host a meeting of all of the records managers and CIOs across the executive branch. So we had a hotel ballroom, and the two of us walked into the room, and they were evenly divided in the room. All of the records managers were on this side, and all the CIOs were on this side. And we even, for a significant number of those participants, it was the first time they had been in the same room together from the same agency. You can't do records management without good support from the technology side of the house. That's what.
Combining IT with archives.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great way to end the formal part. Are there any questions in the room for David? Over there, the blonde woman.
Hello, my name is Ilona van Stijn. I work at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. And I wonder, within the government, okay, I work at the central government, we're often struggling to find enough staff that is interested to work in government activities. From your experience, what could you advise us? How can we find them? How can we make them enthusiastic to work in information government?
It's something I really worry about, and I worried for 4 years about the perception of life in the government. Why would you sign on to have to deal with this turmoil and dysfunction and always in my work with the staff and in thinking about new recruits, it's the mission. It's what is the government here for? What is the role, your role in supporting democracy, supporting the Constitution of the United States? That's what you need to focus on. That it's bigger than an individual president. It's bigger than the day-to-day problems of the agency. You're there to ensure that the democracy of the country is supported and that democracy survives. And that's a sacrifice for some people, but it's being part of something bigger than yourself. And I never, it was almost 13 years, and I don't regret one moment of working for the government.
Good to hear. Any other questions, either online or out there?
Thank you. My name is Jan van Kampenhout. I work at the Municipal Archive in Schiedam. I think most archives in the Netherlands are considered politically neutral. How is the case that in America, now that the country, from our perspective, looks very divided? And is neutrality still an important issue?
Oh, definitely. It's we have always prided ourselves on being nonpartisan. We're not tied to an administration. In fact, when I said 4,000 people in, 4,000 people out, with the exception of the Archivist of the United States, it has to be a nonpartisan appointment. So that's something, for the archives anyway, great premium on ensuring that the staff and all of our policies and procedures are not driven by a political party or a political agenda. And in the Netherlands, as in the United States, we collect the records. We're not, excluding the bad stories or the downside of history. We're collecting history, and that's the nonpartisan way to do our job.
Any digital questions? No, then we have room for one final question in the audience. Where's the guts? Oh, now there is one.
Thank you. There's currently, a big debate in society about the role of archives and the documents within, and pretty much the idea that archives are not neutral institutions, but the documents are assembled from a certain perspective, certain political ideas. Could you reflect a bit on that, about the role of archives in society and how they could be maybe more inclusive?
Well, it's very important. While there may be in that 4-year period of our history, will, I can guarantee you, in that presidential library will reflect a certain bias. But it's important if we're using those materials to put it in context so that in terms of education programs and exhibits and things like that, you present a balanced view of history to negate the bias that appears. We've spent a lot of time as a result of the George Floyd murder analyzing how we have described over history, described records in the National Archives. Not the records themselves, but the descriptions that were created by staff to ensure that we're using non-charged language. And we have been working very closely with the community, starting first with the African American community, and the next community that we've been working with is the Puerto Rican community, to help us review the language that has been used in the past to describe records of that relate to their community, and have been very pleased at the response from the communities, and have been really shocked by the examples of language that was used in the past to describe some of those records. Very controversial project during the previous administration because it was painted as changing the records, that we were actually going in and changing the language of the records, and that's not at all what the project was all about.
Okay, thank you for responding to those questions. Thank you for the interview. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Very informative. Avalon will finish it.
Yes, please. Can somebody? Yes. Now it's on. So thank you all for being here with us, and thank you so much for this wonderful interview. And it's very clear that being an archivist, or the role of the Archivist Society, is very close to your heart. I would like to mention that David also has indicated that he would really like to have his fee donated to a restoration and collections project here at the National Archive, which we are very grateful for. And on behalf of the organizations that organized this lecture, so it's the Royal Association of Archivists in the Netherlands and the National Archives together that jointly organized this lecture. I would like to thank you again with some gifts from both organizations. You will have to carry it, or we can send it to you. There's a couple of books based on sources in the National Archives, and also for you. Thank you, Alexander, for a wonderful interview.
Great.
And well, I would like to invite you all for the drinks, and have a good afternoon. And please stay and have a talk to each other about the things you heard in this lecture.